At 38 years old, Sebastian Hale earned a steady $58,000 a year as a maintenance lead at the U.S. Steel Mill in Birmingham, Alabama. The salary was honest, earned through sweat and skill, keeping the colossal machinery of the plant from grinding to a halt. It paid the mortgage on their modest $450,000 three-bedroom house in Crestwood, covered the payments on his 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, and funded his wife Brielle's increasingly expensive tastes. It was, he had always believed, a good life, a solid life. That belief shattered at 6:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. He had just walked in, the scent of hot metal and grease still clinging to his work clothes, when he saw the crisp, white envelope on the polished granite countertop. It was propped against the $700 Nespresso machine she'd bought last month, the one they couldn't afford. His name was typed on the front. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a letter from a friend. The return address was a law firm downtown, one housed in a glass tower he'd only ever admired from the highway. Inside, the words were cold, legal, and devastating. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Brielle wanted a divorce after 12 years. He stood there, the thick paper trembling in his grease-stained hands, the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator suddenly deafening. She walked in then, not from the bedroom, but from the back patio, holding a glass of chilled, $45 a bottle Sauvignon Blanc. She was wearing a $350 silk lounge set, her expression unreadable. "I see you got it," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he once cherished. It was flat, transactional. "Brielle, what is this?" His voice was a raw whisper. She took a delicate sip of her wine. "It's exactly what it looks like, Sebastian. I want out. I can't do this anymore. This life, this settling." She gestured vaguely around their kitchen, at the solid oak cabinets he'd refinished himself, at the life they had built. Her eyes, however, held a particular kind of contempt he knew all too well. It was a look that had been growing for 6 long years. It was the look she got whenever the topic of his inheritance came up. "What about us?" he asked, the question feeling foolish as soon as it left his lips. "There is no us," she said, finally looking at him. Her gaze flickered over his worn work boots, his simple $89 Timex watch, and landed on his face with a look of profound disappointment. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. I've already drawn up a list of assets. We'll split everything 50-50. The house, your 401k, the savings. It's only fair." He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "Everything?" "Everything," she confirmed. Then a cruel, dismissive smile touched her lips. "Well, almost everything. You can keep your grandfather's dirt patch. I wouldn't want to take your pocket change." The words landed like a physical blow. The dirt patch, the pocket change. For 6 years, that had been her and her sister Soraya's favorite joke. 6 years of laughing at the one thing his grandfather Hezekiah, a man who'd worked his fingers to the bone, had left him. 240 acres of undeveloped land in rural Mississippi. Sebastian had held on to it out of love and respect, a connection to the man who'd taught him how to fix an engine and how to be a man of his word. To Brielle, it was just another symbol of his failure to provide the life of luxury she craved, a life she saw plastered across the social media feeds of her friends in Mountain Brook. He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who stood before him now as a stranger in a silk suit, and he understood. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a hostile takeover of his life, and he had no idea that the punchline to her favorite joke was about to become his salvation. Have you ever felt completely underestimated, only to realize you were holding a card no one else knew was in your hand? It's a feeling that can change everything in an instant. Let us know in the comments if you've ever been in a situation like that. and keep watching to see how Sebastian's world was about to be turned completely upside down. The mockery had begun 6 years earlier, on a rainy Saturday in March. The letter from a small law office in Biloxi, Mississippi, had arrived in a standard, unassuming envelope, costing all of 49 cents to mail. His grandfather Hezekiah had passed away peacefully at the age of 91. Sebastian had grieved for the quiet, strong man with hands as tough as worn leather, but he knew his grandfather had lived a long, full life. The letter detailed the will. Hezekiah, a man who never had more than a few $1,000s in his savings account, had left Sebastian his most prized possession, the deed to 240 acres of family land. Sebastian held the deed, the paper thick and aged, and felt a profound connection to his roots. He showed it to Brielle, his heart full. He left it to me, B, all of it, the land he was so proud of. Brielle had glanced at the document, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. She was sitting at their kitchen table, scrolling through a catalog for a $3,200 restoration hardware leather armchair. 240 acres? Of what? Is there a house on it? No, it's just land, pine trees, a creek. It's been in our family for generations. She'd tossed the deed back on the table with a flick of her wrist. So it's worthless. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. What are you going to do with a bunch of dirt in the middle of nowhere? That was the first time. The seed of contempt had been planted. Over the next 6 years, he watched it grow into a thorny, choking vine that wrapped itself around their marriage. A year later, they were having dinner with her sister, Soraya. Soraya was a carbon copy of Brielle, just a bit sharper, a bit more venomous. They were drinking a bottle of $85 Merlot that Brielle had insisted on buying, eating from a $400 set of crate and barrel dinnerware he knew was sitting on a credit card. We're thinking about our next big trip, Brielle announced, swirling the wine in her glass. Maybe Tuscany, a 2-week tour. It's only about $15,000. Soraya sighed dramatically. Oh, you have to go. The pictures would be incredible, unlike some people's assets. She winked at Sebastian. How's your real estate empire, Seb? Found any oil on that little mud puddle of yours yet? Brielle had laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on his nerves. Don't be silly, Soraya. That pocket change property couldn't buy you a car, let alone a trip to Italy. It's probably not even worth the gas money to go look at it. Sebastian had tried to defend it, to explain its sentimental value. It was my grandfather's, he'd said, his voice quiet. It means something to me. Sentimental value doesn't pay for a $65,000 Lexus SUV, does it? Brielle had retorted, a direct hit referencing a conversation they'd had the week before. He'd told her they couldn't afford the car she wanted, that his Camry was perfectly fine. She had looked at him with such pity, as if he were a child who didn't understand how the world worked. The scenes repeated themselves, a dreary loop of casual cruelty. When his work friend Marcus bought a small fishing boat for $12,000, Brielle had remarked loud enough for everyone at their backyard barbecue to hear, "See? That's what you can buy with a real bonus, not a deed to a swamp." He started to notice how she talked about him to her friends on the phone when she thought he wasn't listening. He'd be in the garage, cleaning his tools, and hear her voice drift through the open window. No, he's still at the plant. God, I don't know how he does it. The smell? And for what? $58,000 a year? It's embarrassing. There would be a pause and then a laugh. Oh, the inheritance? Please. It's a tax liability, not an asset. I think we literally pay more in property taxes on it than it's worth. The property tax was $812 a year. He paid it diligently, out of his own checking account, a small act of devotion to his grandfather's memory. Brielle treated that $812 bill as if it were a catastrophic financial drain, a symbol of his poor judgment. The worst part was the erosion of his own pride. He was a good man. He worked hard. He was a lead at the mill, respected by his crew. He could diagnose a problem in a half-mile-long rolling machine by the sound it made. He was competent, skilled, and honest. But at home, in his own expensive, heavily mortgaged house, he was made to feel small. He was the man with the worthless dirt patch, the man whose ambition had flatlined. He tried to talk to her about it once, about 3 years into the relentless mockery. It was late, around 10:30 p.m., and they were in bed. The only light came from her phone as she scrolled through Instagram, the screen illuminating her focused, unhappy face. "B," he started, his voice soft. "Does it bother you that much? The land?" She didn't look up from her phone. "What are you talking about?" "My grandfather's land. You and Soraya? You make jokes about it. A lot." She finally locked her phone and set it on the $900 nightstand. She turned to him, her expression one of weary impatience. "Sebastian, be realistic. It's a joke because it's absurd. You treat this piece of useless land like it's some grand legacy. It's not. It's a burden. It's a symbol of this." She gestured between them. "Of being stuck. I want more. I want a life. Not a life spent paying taxes on 240 acres of Mississippi mud." He felt something inside him close off then, a door quietly clicking shut. He had loved her so fiercely once. He had seen her as his partner, his equal. But in that moment, he saw her for what she had become, a person who measured a man's worth by the balance in his bank account and a legacy by its market value. The foundation of their marriage wasn't just cracked, it had crumbled into dust. He just hadn't been willing to see it until then. He had no idea how thoroughly she had been planning to demolish the rest of it. The weeks following the delivery of the divorce papers were a masterclass in cold tension. Brielle had insisted on staying in the house, claiming it was her right. She moved into the guest bedroom, a space she immediately started redecorating in her mind, talking loudly on the phone to Soraya about paint colors and knocking down walls. "Once he's gone, this whole floor is going to be an open-concept entertainment space. It'll probably cost about $75,000 to do it right, but it'll add so much value." Sebastian, meanwhile, retreated into himself. He adopted a policy of strategic restraint. He knew, instinctively, that any emotional outburst would be used against him. He had to be calm, methodical. He had to play dumb. His first step was finding a lawyer. He didn't want the sharks from the glass towers downtown. He drove to a quieter part of the city, to a historic building on 4th Avenue North, and found the office of Henderson and Associates. The sign was understated, the office modest. Mr. James Henderson was a black man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as his grandfather's. His suit was a simple, well-kept gray wool, probably costing no more than $400, but he wore it with an air of quiet dignity. Sebastian sat in a worn leather chair across from a large mahogany desk, the initial consultation fee of $350 already paid. He laid out the divorce papers. He explained the situation, his voice flat and tired. He told him about the house, the 401k, the joint savings of $82,000, and Brielle's staggering credit card debt of $78,000, which he had recently discovered she'd been hiding from him. "And what about other assets?" Mr. Henderson asked, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad. Sebastian hesitated. "There's some land in Mississippi. It was my grandfather's." He felt the familiar shame rise in his throat. "It's not worth much." Mr. Henderson looked at him over the top of his reading glasses. "All assets must be disclosed, son, no matter their perceived worth. Do you have the paperwork?" Sebastian pulled the original deed and the 6-year-old letter from the Biloxi law firm out of his worn leather briefcase. Mr. Henderson examined the documents, his expression unreadable. He tapped a finger on the letterhead of the Mississippi firm. "Did you ever follow up with these folks?" The estate attorneys? No, sir. I just got the deed, and I kept it. I paid the taxes. That was it. Your grandfather's name was Hezekiah Hale? Yes, sir. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. Sometimes, with old family land like that, especially in the South, things aren't always as they appear on the surface. Your grandfather established this estate through a law firm for a reason. He didn't just hand you a deed he'd written himself. He made it official, legal. There might be more to it. He wrote down a note. I think our first step before we even respond to our lawyer's ridiculous demands is to make a call. Back at the house, the charade continued. Brielle would leave swatches of expensive fabric on the dining room table, priced at $200 per yard. She'd have contractors come by to give her estimates for the renovations, introducing Sebastian as my soon-to-be ex. He's just here temporarily. He'd nod politely, offer them a bottle of water, and then retreat to the garage. One evening, she came to him with a stack of preliminary financial disclosure forms her lawyer had prepared. Just sign these, she'd said, her tone breezy. It's just a formality. It lists all our assets so we can get the ball rolling. He took the papers and scanned them. She had valued the Mississippi land at $50,000, a number she seemed to have pulled from thin air. She had also conveniently omitted her last 3 credit card statements, which included a $4,000 charge for a Chanel handbag and a $2,800 weekend spa trip to Chateau Elan with Soraya. I'll have my lawyer look these over, he said, his voice even. Her eyes narrowed. Your lawyer? Seb? Don't make this difficult. There's no need to spend thousands of dollars on lawyers to tell us what we already know. We split it down the middle. It's simple. I just want to make sure everything is done correctly, he said, his calmness infuriating her. He was supposed to be broken. He was supposed to be begging. Instead, he was being procedural. He spent his evenings in the small home office, not watching television, but meticulously gathering evidence. He downloaded every bank statement for the last 5 years. He printed out every credit card bill, highlighting the extravagant, non-essential purchases Brielle had made. He took photos of her new designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, looking up their retail prices online and creating a spreadsheet. The $2,400 Burberry dress she'd worn to a fundraiser, the $1,800 David Yurman bracelet she'd bought herself for her birthday. It was a mountain of financial recklessness, totaling well over $100,000 in just a few years. All while she complained they were stuck. He was playing a part, the simple, agreeable husband who was rolling over, ready to be sheared. Every nod, every quiet "okay" was a lie. Inside, a cold, hard resolve was forming. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to see it through with the same quiet dignity his grandfather had lived his life with. He had no idea what was coming. But he knew one thing for sure. He would not let her or her sister laugh at his grandfather's memory ever again. The quiet man was finally getting ready to make some noise. The phone call that changed everything came on a Thursday morning at 9:42 a.m. Sebastian was on his break at the mill, sitting in his truck, the air thick with the industrial hum of the plant. The caller ID showed a Mississippi number he didn't recognize. He answered it. Mr. Hale, this is Benjamin Calvert. I'm a senior trust officer with Harrison and Cole. We're the firm that managed your late grandfather's estate. The man's voice was formal, precise, with a slight southern drawl. Sebastian's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the firm Mr. Henderson had contacted. Yes, sir. It's good to hear from you. Likewise, Mr. Calvert said. Your attorney, Mr. Henderson, reached out to us with some inquiries regarding the property left to you by Mr. Hezekiah Hale. We've been reviewing the file. It's quite extensive. I was hoping you might have time to come down to our offices in Biloxi to discuss the particulars of the trust. The trust? Sebastian repeated the word. It sounded foreign. I thought it was just land. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Well, sir, it is land. But the land is an asset held within a revocable trust set up by your grandfather 40 years ago. There are significant details pertaining to its administration that we need to discuss with you in person, as the sole beneficiary. Sebastian drove the 4.5 hours to Biloxi the next day, a Friday. He took a personal day from work, telling Brielle he had to visit a sick aunt, a lie she accepted without a second thought, too busy coordinating the delivery of a new $5,000 Peloton bike to Care. The offices of Harrison and Cole were nothing like Mr. Henderson's. They were in a stately brick building overlooking the Gulf, with antique maps on the walls and the quiet, moneyed hush of a place that handled old fortunes. Benjamin Calvert was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Sebastian's entire wardrobe. He led Sebastian into a conference room paneled in dark wood. The air smelled of lemon polish and old paper. "Please have a seat," Calvert said, gesturing to a large leather chair. He placed a thick blue folder on the table between them. It was bound with a string. "Mr. Hale, what I'm about to tell you is going to be a lot to take in. I want you to feel free to ask any questions." Sebastian just nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Calvert untied the string and opened the folder. He cleared his throat. "Your grandfather, Hezekiah, was a very wise and far-sighted man. He bought that land back in 1958. For years, it was exactly what you thought it was, timberland. He managed it, harvested pine on a rotating basis. It provided a modest income. But in the late 1970s, geological surveys were done in that region. They discovered significant deposits of natural gas in the Haynesville Shale Formation, which runs directly beneath your family's property." Sebastian stared at him, trying to process the words. Natural gas. "Your grandfather was approached by several energy companies," Calvert continued, his voice steady. "He was a shrewd negotiator. He refused to sell the land. Absolutely refused. Instead, he agreed to lease the mineral rights. He set up an ironclad trust, with this firm as the trustee to manage those leases and the subsequent royalty payments. The trust was structured so that the principal could not be touched. The funds were to be reinvested, managed, and allowed to grow. He named you the sole beneficiary upon his death." Calvert slid a document across the table. It was a summary statement, full of columns and numbers. Sebastian's eyes scanned the page, but the figures were so large they seemed unreal. "For the past 40 years, Mr. Hale, this trust has been collecting royalties from 3 separate long-term leases with 2 of the largest energy exploration companies in North America. The portfolio was managed aggressively, as per your grandfather's instructions. He wanted to build a true legacy." Calvert paused, then pointed to the bottom line on the page. "As of the close of business yesterday, the total value of the Hezekiah Hale Revocable Trust, of which you are now the primary trustee and sole beneficiary, is $312,845,112.21. The sound in the room seemed to vanish. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the number, $312,845, $112.21. He looked at Calvert. He looked back at the number. His hands began to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was the dirt patch, the mud puddle, the pocket change. "My grandfather?" Sebastian's voice was a choked whisper. "He never said a word. He lived in a 2-bedroom house. He drove a 20-year-old Ford truck. He was a simple man." "He was," Calvert agreed softly. "He was also the wealthiest man in his county by a significant margin. He didn't believe in flaunting wealth. He believed in building it. For you. He told my predecessor, the founder of this firm, that he wanted his grandson to know the value of hard work first. He wanted you to build a life on your own terms, with your own two hands before this ever came into the picture. He said money could ruin a man who hadn't first found his own worth. Tears welled in Sebastian's eyes. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of joy. It was a tear of overwhelming grief and gratitude for the quiet, brilliant man who had played the longest of games. All for him. Calvert pushed a second document toward him. There is one other critical detail, especially given your current domestic situation, which Mr. Henderson outlined for us. The trust is an inherited asset. It was established long before your marriage. The funds have never been commingled with any marital accounts. They have been held exclusively by the trust under your grandfather's name and now yours. Legally, it is considered separate property, entirely and unequivocally yours. Sebastian sat there for a long time, the weight of it all settling over him. $312 million. He thought of Brielle and Soraya, laughing at him over their expensive wine. He thought of the contempt in his wife's eyes. He thought of her grand plans to take half of his 401k and kick him out of his own home. A cold, still clarity washed over him. The kind of clarity that comes when the entire world has just been turned on its head. The game had changed, and Brielle had no idea she was even playing. The day of the first mediation hearing was overcast. The Birmingham sky a flat metallic gray that perfectly matched the cold dread and grim resolve in Sebastian's heart. Rain began to fall as he parked his old Camry in the visitor's lot of the glass tower where Brielle's lawyer had her office. He wore the best suit he owned, a simple Navy number that had cost him $400 from Men's Warehouse, freshly pressed. He carried the same worn leather briefcase he always did. To anyone watching, he was the same Sebastian Hale, the steel worker, the man about to be taken to the cleaners. He met Mr. Henderson in the lobby. His lawyer was the picture of calm, his gray suit immaculate, his presence reassuring. "You ready, son?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," Sebastian said, and he meant it. They rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 28th floor. The law offices were a world of chrome, glass, and hushed importance. They were led to a conference room with a panoramic view of the city below. Brielle was already there, seated at the long, polished table. She looked magnificent and terrible, a beautiful predator. She wore an $8,700 Armani suit, the color of cream, and her expression was one of bored confidence. Her sister, Soraya, sat beside her, a smug smirk playing on her lips, there for emotional support, which Sebastian knew meant she was there to watch him squirm. Brielle's lawyer, a woman named Miss Albright, who billed at $100 or $200 an hour, gave them a curt, dismissive nod. The strike was about to begin. It would not be loud. It would be quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. Ms. Albright started the proceedings, her voice sharp and efficient. "As you know, we are here to discuss the equitable distribution of marital assets. It's a fairly straightforward case. My client is entitled to 50% of all assets accumulated during the 12 years of marriage." She slid a folder across the table. "We have the appraisal on the marital home on Crestwood Drive, valued at $450,000, with $180,000 in equity. Mr. Hale's 401k has a current balance of $212,000, of which $184,000 is considered marital property. Joint savings total $82,000. My client is prepared to buy out Mr. Hale's share of the house, and we are petitioning for standard spousal support given the income disparity." She glanced down at her notes. "There is also the matter of a small parcel of land in Mississippi. We have assigned it a generous estimated value of $50,000, which my client is willing to let Mr. Hale retain in its entirety." Soraya snickered softly. Brielle shot her a warning glance. But the damage was done. The air was thick with their condescension. Mr. Henderson let the silence hang in the room for a moment before he spoke. Ms. Albright, my client is in agreement with your valuation of the home and the 401k. However, your assessment of the Mississippi property is incomplete. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. Incomplete? It's 240 acres of undeveloped timberland. Our valuation is, as I said, generous. I'm not referring to the land itself, Mr. Henderson said calmly, but to the asset management structure of which the land is a part. He opened his own briefcase and pulled out a single, neatly prepared folder. There is another asset that was not included in your disclosure, an inherited trust. We have the trustee on a video conference call to explain the details, to ensure full transparency. He turned to a large monitor on the wall and nodded. The screen flickered to life, and the face of Benjamin Calvert appeared, seated in his wood-paneled office in Biloxi. He looked professional, serious, and utterly unflappable. Brielle and Soraya exchanged a confused look. Ms. Albright's confident posture tightened slightly. A trust? What trust? Mr. Calvert, Mr. Henderson said, his voice projecting authority, if you would be so kind as to summarize the nature and value of the Hezekiah Hale Revocable Trust for the record. Calvert nodded. Certainly. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. The asset in question is a trust established by Mr. Hezekiah Hale in 1978, with the 240-acre property as its primary holding. For the past 4 decades, the trust has managed the mineral rights leases associated with that property. As of this morning, the total value of the trust, of which Mr. Sebastian Hale is the sole and exclusive beneficiary, is $313,042,700. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Sebastian watched Brielle's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The bored confidence drained away, replaced by stark, utter disbelief. Her mouth opened slightly. The color faded from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white against her expensive cream suit. She looked from the screen to her lawyer to Sebastian, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror. Soraya's jaw had literally dropped. She was staring at Sebastian as if she had never seen him before. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of nauseous shock. Ms. Albright was the first to recover, though her voice was strained. 300 million? That's impossible. This has to be a mistake. I assure you it is no mistake, Calvert said, his voice flat. We have all the documentation, which we have already forwarded to Mr. Henderson. Furthermore, as this is an inherited asset, established decades prior to the marriage, and whose funds have never been commingled with marital accounts, it is legally classified as separate, non-marital property under both Alabama and Mississippi state law. Mr. Henderson delivered the final, quiet blow. He looked directly at Brielle, his expression impassive. My client's wife often referred to this inheritance as pocket change. She once joked that it couldn't buy you a car. It seems the pocket was quite a bit deeper than she imagined. He repeated her own words back to her, a verbatim callback to years of mockery. And in that moment, Brielle's entire world, her entire strategy, her entire sense of superiority crumbled into absolute ruin. She pushed her chair back, her movements jerky, and whispered something to her lawyer, her face a mask of frantic panic. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful, sophisticated woman had been obliterated, revealing the grasping, desperate person underneath. The strike was complete, and the consequences were just beginning to cascade. The aftermath of the revelation was chaos, contained only by the professional decorum of the conference room. Ms. Albright, her face ashen, immediately requested a recess. She and a visibly trembling Brielle, with Soraya trailing behind like a lost child, hurried out into the hallway. Through the glass wall, Sebastian could see them, a pantomime of panic. Brielle's arms were flailing, her face contorted in a silent scream of rage and disbelief. Soraya was talking furiously, pointing first at Ms. Albright, then back into the room at Sebastian. The high-powered lawyer was on her phone, her expression grim. The entire foundation of her case had evaporated in a single, 60-second statement from a trust officer in Mississippi. They returned 20 minutes later, utterly defeated. The fight was gone from Brielle's eyes, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. The rest of the mediation was a formality, a surrender. The terms were no longer a negotiation. They were a dictation. The consequences cascaded swiftly and without mercy, each one a direct result of Brielle's own choices. First, the legal downfall. The court affirmed the trust as Sebastian's separate property. It was untouchable. The marital assets to be divided were exactly what Ms. Albright had first laid out, only now they seemed pitifully small. The $180,000 in home equity, the $184,000 from his 401k, the $82,000 in savings. Total marital pot, $446,000. Her 50% share was $223,000. From that, her own $78,000 in credit card debt was deducted, as it was deemed her personal liability due to the nature of the spending. This left her with $145,000. Her legal fees, for the high-powered lawyer whose entire strategy had been flawed from the start, came to a staggering $62,000. Brielle walked away from 12 years of marriage with a final check for $83,000. It was less than the cost of the Lexus SUV she had always wanted. Sebastian, using a fraction of a percent of his trust's interest, bought her out of her share of the house. He kept his home. Second, the social collapse. Brielle had built her identity around the image of a woman on the verge of a wealthy, sophisticated life. Her divorce was supposed to be her springboard, funded by half of everything Sebastian had. Instead, the story of the disastrous mediation leaked, as such stories always do in the gossipy circles of Mountain Brook. She wasn't the savvy divorcee. She was the woman who had fumbled a $300 million fortune, the woman who had mocked her husband for his pocket change only to find out he was one of the wealthiest men in the state. The humiliation was absolute. The invitations to fundraisers and spa weekends dried up. Her friends, who had been allies in her quest for a better life, now saw her as a fool. Third, the financial ruin. With just $83,000 to her name, she could no longer afford her lifestyle. The lease on her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car, was up. She couldn't afford a new one. She was forced to move out of the beautiful Crestwood home and into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town, costing $1,800 a month. Her roommate was Soraya. The two sisters, once united in their shared contempt for Sebastian, now turned on each other. Their apartment became a pressure cooker of resentment and blame. Sebastian heard from a mutual acquaintance that they saw her trying to return the $4,000 Chanel handbag to the department store, claiming it was a gift, only to be refused because it was past the return date. Fourth, the emotional breakdown. In the weeks after the final decree, Sebastian's phone was bombarded with a series of voicemails and texts from Brielle, a perfect chronicle of her collapse. The first message was denial. There has to be a way to fight this. My lawyer says we can appeal. This isn't fair. Then came anger. You hid this from me for years. You let me believe we were struggling. This is deceit, Sebastian. You deceived me. This was followed by pleading. Seb, please, we can talk about this. We had 12 years. That has to mean something. Don't throw it all away over a legal technicality. Then, a desperate attempt at reconciliation. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said about your grandfather. I didn't understand. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I still love you. Finally, there was just brokenness. A tearful voicemail left at 2 a.m, her voice thick with alcohol and regret. I lost everything. I had everything and I didn't even know it. I'm so sorry, Seb. I ruined everything. He never responded. He listened to each message, not with satisfaction, but with a profound and weary sadness. He felt nothing for her anymore. Not anger, not love, not even pity. He just felt the great, quiet emptiness of a space that had once been filled with a life they were supposed to have built together. Her downfall wasn't his victory. It was simply the inevitable, mathematical result of her own cruelty and greed. He had done nothing but stand still and let the truth come to light. 2 years passed, the world kept turning, and Sebastian Hale's life found a new, quiet rhythm. He did not quit his job at the steel mill. To the surprise of everyone, especially his co-workers who had heard the rumors, he showed up every morning at 6 a.m., put on his hard hat and his work boots, and went to work. The deep, rumbling hum of the machinery was a comfort to him, a reminder of the tangible, honest world he had always known. The money, all $313 million of it, was an abstract concept managed expertly by Mr. Calvert and his team in Biloxi. His life was here, in Birmingham, on the solid ground he had always stood on. He still lived in the Crestwood house, but it was different now. The expensive, soulless furniture Brielle had bought was gone, replaced by comfortable, sturdy pieces he'd chosen himself. The walls were filled not with abstract art, but with framed photographs of his grandfather, his parents, and the rolling pine forests of Mississippi. The air in the house was lighter. It was a home again, not a showroom. The real change was what he did with the legacy his grandfather had left him. In honor of Hezekiah, he established a foundation. Its first and primary initiative was the Hezekiah's Hammer Apprenticeship Program. He partnered with the local community college and his own union at the mill to create a fully funded program that took young, ambitious men and women from Birmingham's tougher neighborhoods and gave them paid training to become skilled industrial mechanics, electricians, and welders. The program covered their tuition, their tools, often costing thousands of dollars, and provided a living stipend. He spent his Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the training center, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a mentor. He'd stand over a disassembled gearbox with a 19-year-old kid, his hands covered in grease, explaining the intricacies of the machinery. He saw the same hunger and pride in their eyes that he had felt when he was starting out. He was giving them what his grandfather had given him. Not just money, but a trade, a skill, a sense of purpose. He was building something real. His weekends were his own. He discovered a love for hiking the quiet wooded trails of Ruffner Mountain Nature Preserve. He'd pack a simple lunch, a sandwich, and an apple in his old canvas backpack and spend hours walking beneath the canopy of trees, the sounds of the city fading away until all he could hear was the crunch of leaves under his boots and the call of the birds. The sunlight filtering through the leaves felt like a blessing. The rain, once a backdrop to his accumulating misery, now felt like a cleansing. It was on one of these Sunday hikes that he began to feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. He saw Brielle one last time. It was a Wednesday afternoon at the Publix on Montclair Road. He was in the produce section, picking out avocados, when he heard a hesitant voice say his name. He turned. She looked diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a faded t-shirt. The confident, icy posture had been replaced by a slump in her shoulders. Her face was pale, and she looked tired. "Sebastian," she said again, her voice soft, "you look good." "You too, Brielle," he said politely. It was a lie, but it was a kind one. "I heard about what you're doing," she said, gesturing vaguely. "The program for the kids at the mill. That's a good thing." "It's what my grandfather would have wanted," he replied, his voice even. An awkward silence fell between them. She looked down at her shopping basket, which held a generic brand of pasta and a jar of sauce. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she whispered, the words sounding rusty, unused. "For everything, for how I treated you, for what I said about your grandfather. I was a fool." He looked at the woman who had caused him so much pain, who had laughed at his most cherished connection to his past, and he felt the last embers of resentment within him finally turn to ash. He forgave her. Not for her sake, but for his. Holding on to that anger was like carrying a heavy stone in his pack on one of his hikes. It served no purpose but to weigh him down. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Brielle," he said, and he meant it. He wished her peace, because he had finally found his own. He nodded, turned, and continued with his shopping. He didn't look back. As he drove home, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road. He thought about his grandfather, the quiet, brilliant man who had understood the nature of true wealth. It isn't about the numbers in a bank account, or the price tag on a car, or the square footage of a house. True wealth is character, it's integrity, it's the pride in a job well done, the love of family, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that will outlast you. Hezekiah Hale hadn't just left his grandson a fortune, he had left him a lesson, and Sebastian was finally beginning to understand the full value of his inheritance. What do you believe is the most important legacy we can leave behind? Is it wealth, wisdom, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice and redemption.